If you're listening to this to fall asleep, don't. Not with this story. I know the rain in the background feels safe, soft, hypnotic. It lulls you, makes you think you're wrapped in a blanket, disconnected from the world. But trust me when I say, rain has always sounded different to me, louder, heavier, like it's trying to drown out something it doesn't want you to hear. And if you close your eyes now, you won't notice when the sounds underneath it begin to shift. You think this is just another late-night horror story video, something you can half listen to until your breathing slows and your mind drifts. But the things I'm about to tell you, they aren't just stories. They're not fiction. And some of them weren't even meant to leave the walls of the hospital where they happened. I should probably clarify. When I say hospital, I don't mean the kind with white sheets and bouquets in the hallway. I mean the kind where the windows barely open, the lights never seem to stay steady, and the staff's smiles are stretched just a little too thin. A psychiatric ward, psych ward, to use the blunt term. And I spent more time there than I ever meant to. Long enough to know the things you've probably suspected but never said out loud. That what goes on in places like that doesn't always stay within the limits of medicine. The first time I heard rain against the psych ward's windows, I was struck by how muffled it sounded, like the glass itself was pressing it down. That night I thought it was soothing. I even fell asleep to it. But I learned quickly, falling asleep in a place like that is a mistake. Because when the rain comes, the whispers come with it. Maybe I sound paranoid already. Maybe you're rolling your eyes thinking this is just me setting the stage. But no, I'm telling you this because if you fall asleep right now with this story in your ears, you'll invite the same things that haunted me. The same things that still wake me up at night. You see, the ward had rules, not the ones posted on the walls, about meal times or visitor hours. These were different. The kind you only learned the hard way, or because some half-broken soul whispered them to you when the orderlies weren't listening. The first rule was simple. Don't fall asleep when the rain is falling. That's when the doors creak open on their own. That's when the empty rooms aren't empty anymore. I can feel you doubting me through the screen, and that's fine. Doubt is safer than belief. Belief makes you curious. And curiosity is what kept me awake those first few nights, straining my ears to hear what shuffled down the hall. Sometimes it sounded like patients crying. Sometimes it sounded like someone dragging fingernails against the linoleum. Once it sounded like my own mother's voice, even though she'd never visited me there. She just whispered my name over and over until the rain stopped. Now you understand why I'm warning you. Because these stories don't stop when the telling ends. They linger. They breathe in your ear while you sleep. And if this video disappears, you'll know why. Someone will have decided I said too much, but I'll keep going for now. Because maybe you need to hear it. Maybe some of you have family in these wards. Maybe you've been inside one yourself. Maybe the rain already sounds wrong to you too. All I'll ask is this. If your eyelids are heavy, force them open. Don't give in, not yet. The rain outside might sound calm, but inside these walls, calm never lasts. And trust me, this is only the beginning. Every ward has that patient. The one whose name gets whispered with a mix of pity and contempt. The one new staff are warned about during orientation. At St. Alora's, it was the woman in room 12. No one called her by name. Not really. To most of the staff, she was just the screamer. Her routine was clockwork. At exactly 3:17 a.m., the screams would start. Not 3:16, not 3:18. Always 3:17, as though something set an invisible alarm only she could hear. I'm not exaggerating when I say exactly. I checked my watch more times than I can count. and every single night it was precise to the second. The first night I heard it, I jumped out of bed in the staff dorm thinking some emergency was unfolding. The sound was sharp, high-pitched, raw enough to scrape at my teeth. I burst into the hall expecting chaos, but the orderlies barely lifted their heads. One of them, a guy named Harris who'd been there for years, just muttered, "Room 12, go back to bed. Go back to bed." Like it was nothing. But it wasn't nothing. Not to me. The second night I lingered by her door, listening. The screams were the same at first, ragged, guttural, pained. But if you stood long enough, you'd start to notice the differences. A rhythm hidden in the wailing, syllables almost forming. Like she was trying to speak through the shrieking. I asked one of the nurses about it over breakfast. She didn't even look up from her coffee. "Trauma loop," she said flatly. Some patients get stuck. Their minds replay one moment forever like a broken record. But it doesn't sound the same every night, I insisted. She shrugged. "Doesn't matter. We medicate, we restrain if we need to, but we don't fix loops." That was the thing about the ward. Desensitization. People could be screaming their lungs out every single night, and the staff treated it like background noise, like the hum of the lights or the squeak of rubber soles. By the third week, I stopped trying to convince them, but I couldn't stop listening, because the truth is her screams were changing, slowly. So slowly you'd think you were imagining it. They became deeper, stretched out, almost hollow. The kind of sound you'd expect echoing in a cave, not coming from a human throat. One night I swear I heard words. Not English, not anything I recognized, but repeated, as though the thing inside her was rehearsing. I pressed my ear against the metal door just to be sure I wasn't losing my mind. And that's when I felt it, the vibration. Not of her voice, but of something else. Something beneath her voice. Like the scream was just a cover, and there was another sound layered under it, waiting to be noticed. I remember cornering Harris in the break room after that. "Doesn't it bother you? Doesn't it sound different now?" He gave me this tired look, chewing his sandwich like I was a nuisance. "Listen, rookie," he said. "Room 12 has been screaming since before you got here, and she'll still be screaming when you leave. Don't romanticize it. Don't make it into something it isn't." "But what if it is something else?" He didn't answer. He just walked away. And maybe that's what scared me most. Not the screams themselves, but the way everyone else had decided to pretend it was normal. The final night I worked there, I couldn't resist. I stood by her door again, waiting for 3:17. I watched the clock tick. My pulse raced in sync. When the second hand landed on the mark, I braced myself. The screams came right on time, but they weren't hers. I knew her voice. I knew the jagged edges of it, the way it ripped through the hall like glass. What I heard that night was wrong. It was lower, too low. Email, guttural, like the sound of stone grinding against stone. And layered inside it, faint but clear, was laughter. I stumbled back, staring at the closed door. I wanted to run, to get someone, but I froze. Because in that moment I realized something horrifying. Room 12 wasn't locked. Not anymore. And if you're waiting for me to tell you what happened when it opened, I can't, because I wasn't the one who opened it. Every psych ward has rules, strict ones. No visitors after 8 p.m. IDs logged at the front desk, cameras watching every hallway. The system wasn't perfect, but it was airtight enough that you knew when someone slipped through. Something wasn't right. That's what made the visitor so terrifying. The first time I heard about him, it came from a patient in room 6. She was trembling during morning meds. whispering that a man in the hall had stood by her door all night. She described him like she'd seen him up close. Tall, too thin, skin stretched tight like damp paper. His clothes, she said, looked wet. I chalked it up to hallucination. That's the safe explanation in a psych ward. But 2 days later, another patient on the opposite end of the hall mentioned the same thing. Same description, same night. And the kicker? Their rooms didn't even have line of sight to each other. Coincidence? Shared delusion? That's what I told myself, till I saw the logbook. Every visitor had to sign in and out. Family, friends, even clergy. The night both patients reported seeing him, there were no signatures past 7:55 p.m. The front desk swore up and down no one entered after that. The security guards laughed it off when I asked. If some tall creep got in, the cameras would have caught him, one said. So I checked the footage myself. Do you know what happens when you stare at hours of black and white hallway video, waiting for something to move? You start to see shadows where there are none. I thought that's all it was until the tape froze. Not skipped, not fuzzed, froze. At exactly 2:11 a.m., when the feed resumed, 4 minutes were missing. And right at the edge of the frame, for less than a second, there was a blur. A tall blur. I didn't tell anyone. Not at first. Because I wasn't sure what scared me more. The possibility that he was real, or that no one else seemed to notice. Over the weeks, the stories piled up. A boy in the adolescent unit woke up screaming that a man had been sitting on his bed. An elderly patient swore she saw someone too tall for the doorway glide past her window. Every description matched, and somehow every time the cameras glitched, it became a quiet obsession of mine. I kept asking questions, scribbling notes, trying to connect dots. That's when Harris, the same orderly who brushed off room 12, cornered me. "Drop it," he said. "You're not the first to notice him. You won't be the last. But if you want to last here, you'll let it go. What is he?" I pressed. Harris didn't answer. He just shook his head and muttered, "Not signed in, not ours to handle." That phrase haunted me, not signed in. The patients, though, they weren't as dismissive. They whispered about him constantly. They called him the tall man, like he was an old acquaintance. Some even asked staff to move their beds away from the windows. And yet none of them had ever spoken to each other about it. Different units, different wings. Same details, I tried to rationalize. Shared folklore spreads fast in enclosed spaces. Delusions echo, but there was something too consistent about it, too rehearsed. The night I stopped doubting was the night I saw him myself. It was after a double shift. I was bone tired. The kind of tired that makes you question whether you're awake at all. Rain hammered the glass outside the staff room. I remember leaning against the window, staring out into the black courtyard, letting the sound lull me. That's when I noticed the reflection. At first, I thought it was me. Same posture, same angle. But the proportions were wrong. Taller, stretched like a funhouse mirror version of myself. His head tilted, too slow, as if noticing me notice him. And though the reflection's mouth never moved, I swear I heard a whisper. "Right behind my ear, you're logged in." I spun, heart pounding, but the room was empty. Just the rain, just the hum of the fluorescence. The reflection was gone. I never told anyone about that night. But after that, I stopped leaning close to windows in the ward. I don't recommend you do either. Because sometimes the visitor doesn't need to be signed in. Sometimes he's already with you. There are certain sounds you expect to hear in a psych ward at night. The squeak of nurses' shoes, the steady beep of a monitor, the occasional sob muffled by thin walls. Those noises become the background music of the job. You stop noticing them after a while, but there was one sound I never got used to. One sound that still crawls under my skin. Singing. It started faint, drifting through the vents like steam from a kettle. A low, almost tender hum, weaving itself into something that might have been a lullaby. Too soft to make out the words, if there were words at all, but clear enough to know it didn't belong. The first report came from a young man in room 14. He swore he heard a woman's voice above him, crooning through the air ducts. The staff brushed it off as imagination, or maybe the radio a nurse had left on. But a week later, another patient, 3 rooms down, reported the same thing. And then another, always at night, always through the vents. What made it unsettling wasn't just the singing, it was who could hear it. Not everyone, only a handful of patients scattered across the building. The rest of us heard nothing. I remember one night making my rounds, flashlight sweeping across the dim hall, when a patient suddenly grabbed my wrist through the bars of his door. His eyes were wild, his voice a rasp. "She's in the ceiling," he whispered. "She wants me to sleep." He hadn't slept in days. His eyes were ringed with bruised shadows. His hands trembled like he'd been through withdrawal. The progression was always the same. First, insomnia. They couldn't bear to close their eyes, terrified of what the lullaby would lead to. Then silence. They stopped speaking altogether. Lips pressed tight like they were afraid something would crawl out if they opened them. And then, one by one, they vanished. No, not discharged. Not transferred, vanished. I checked the records. Their files didn't exist anymore. Not even a trace. Like they'd never been admitted. I tried to bring it up once during staff briefing. Half joking, half serious. "Hey, any of you hear the phantom choir practice at night?" Nervous laughter, shrugs. Someone muttered about air pressure in old vents. Harris, always with his tired eyes, gave me a look sharp enough to stop me from pushing further. But the patients kept going missing. The last one I remember clearly was a woman named Carol. Sweet, soft-spoken. She'd shuffle along the halls during day hours, muttering prayers under her breath. One night she called me into her room. Her voice was trembling, her finger pointing at the vent above her bed. "She sings to me," she said. "Do you hear her?" I didn't, but I told her I'd stay until she felt safe, so I sat there listening to silence. Minutes dragged on. Carol's eyes stayed locked on the vent, unblinking. Then out of nowhere, she smiled. "She says it's time." The next morning, her bed was empty. Her name scrubbed from the logs. When I asked about her, the charge nurse frowned and said, "We've never had a Carol here." I stopped asking after that. But here's the part I can't shake. Sometimes when I'm lying awake trying to let the rain lull me to sleep, I hear it again. That same faint lullaby. Not through hospital vents, but through my own walls. And when I do, I stay awake. No matter how tired, no matter how heavy my eyelids get. Because the ones who listened, they never woke up again. So if you're listening to this now using the rain to drift off, do yourself a favor. If you hear singing, soft, sweet, almost comforting, don't close your eyes. Because once you do, the lullaby won't stop, and you might not be here in the morning. There was a patient everyone just called the kid, though he wasn't really a child. Late teens, maybe early 20s. But something about him, the way he held himself, the way his voice never lost that tremor of innocence, made you want to protect him. He spent every waking moment drawing. Not people, not houses, not animals, just rain. Sheets of it, slanted lines filling page after page. He'd beg for crayons, pens, even the stub of a dull pencil if that's all he could get. And every time the paper would end up the same. Endless rain. When I asked him why, he answered simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world, it keeps them away. I pressed him once. Who did it keep away? He just shook his head and kept drawing. The staff wrote it off as fixation. Some kids draw superheroes, some draw rain, one nurse said with a shrug. But I started noticing something strange. On nights when storms rolled in and the real rain beat against the ward's windows, the atmosphere shifted. Patients who were usually restless grew calm. Screams quieted. Even the staff moved with a strange, relieved ease, like the whole building was breathing easier. But then came the dry spell. A week with no clouds, no storms. The air inside felt heavy, electric, like the static just before a lightning strike. The kid grew frantic. He tore through paper, filling stacks with frantic streaks of rain, lines overlapping until the pages nearly ripped. He stopped eating, stopped speaking, just drew. I remembered checking in on him one night. His fingers were black with graphite smudges. His eyes ringed dark like he hadn't blinked in hours. "They're coming," he whispered, staring not at me but at the blank ceiling. "Who?" I asked. "The ones who hate the rain." The next night, the sky stayed clear, and the kid was gone. His room was neat, bed made, papers stacked in a perfect pile. The only sign he'd ever been there was one drawing left on the pillow. A storm darker than the others, the rain almost violent in the way it slashed across the page. When I brought it up at the desk, the charge nurse frowned. "We've never had a patient like that. You must be mixing up cases." But I knew I wasn't. I had the drawing, I still do. Folded in the back of an old notebook, hidden away like something dangerous. I don't know why I never threw it out. Maybe part of me wanted proof, something tangible to cling to. Sometimes I take it out, just to see if it's still there, if the lines haven't blurred away like all the other records. And sometimes, I swear it feels damp, not smudged, not stained, wet, like the page had just been pulled from under a storm. I don't keep it out long. I don't like to. Because every time I touch it, I get the feeling that if the rain ever stops for good, I'll be next. Every hospital has its off-limits areas. Storage rooms, utility closets. Wings marked condemned in blocky black letters. Most of the time, it's just a bureaucratic holdover. But at our ward, the sealed-off wing was different. The staff called it the old unit or the locked wing. Patients had other names. The feeding place. The hall with no end. Even the ones who didn't speak much would flinch if you mentioned it. I remember one orderly whispering, "Don't even look at that door after dark. It looks back." Officially, it had been closed for renovations decades ago, but nothing about it felt abandoned. The door, a heavy dented slab of metal with a coated lock, looked newer than the rest of the building, like it had been reinforced from the inside out. And still sometimes at night rounds I'd catch a faint sound drifting from behind it. A slow, irregular dripping, like water pooling somewhere it shouldn't. I tried asking about it. One senior nurse told me flatly, "That wing's condemned. Structural issues." Another, a tech who'd been there for years, leaned in close and muttered, "It's condemned because it was fed." When I asked what that meant, she just shook her head, lips pressed tight, and walked away. By then, curiosity had already taken root. I'd been working nights for months, and the rhythm of the place had become its own kind of lullaby. Pills, checks, screams, the hum of the vending machine. The sealed wing was the one note out of place. One night during a thunderstorm, the outer alarm shorted for a few minutes. The keypad on the door flickered weakly. My heart was hammering before I even realized I was moving toward it. The door opened easier than I expected, a soft hiss of old air exhaling past me. The smell hit first, coppery, metallic, like old blood mixed with mildew. Inside, the walls were lined with peeling paint. The hall stretched farther than it should have, vanishing into darkness. Beds sat in crooked rows, their frames rusted but their restraints intact. Some of the leather straps were torn clean through, as if by something far stronger than wrists. And there were marks, claw marks gouged into the concrete, deep parallel rakes that no human nails could make. They trailed up the walls, across the ceiling, and back down again, as if something had crawled in every direction. The dripping was louder here, plink, plink, plink. It echoed through the hall like a heartbeat. I moved deeper. Each step felt like wading into thick water. My flashlight caught on a shape at the end of the corridor. A door with no handle, only a keyhole sealed with wax. Around it, the concrete was stained darker than the rest, like something had seeped out over years. I don't remember deciding to turn back. One moment I was staring at that door. The next I was stumbling into the main hall, the heavy slab slamming shut behind me. My hands were shaking. My shoes left faint wet prints on the linoleum. I kept telling myself it was just water, just a leak somewhere back there. But the smell of copper clung to me the rest of the night, metallic and sweet, like a coin held on the tongue. In the weeks after, little things started happening. Lights flickering when I walked past. Patients watching me with wide, unblinking eyes. A shadow in the corner of the break room mirror that wasn't mine. I never went back to the locked wing. I don't even look at the door when I pass now. But sometimes, especially on nights when the rain is thin and the air feels heavy, I swear I hear that dripping sound again. And every time I do, it feels closer. Every psych ward has its quiet ones. The patients who don't scream, don't lash out, don't draw attention. They just exist, tucked into the corner of a room or sitting silently at group therapy, scribbling in notebooks. One of ours was like that. He never spoke a word in the time I worked there. The staff called him the writer, because all he did was fill journal after journal with cramped, uneven handwriting. Pages upon pages of names, dates, and little symbols that looked like half-finished calendars. At first I thought it was meaningless, just another patient lost in their own ritual. Until I started noticing the names. I'd be flipping through his files and there it was. December 5th, Nurse Kelly. Kelly had given notice, planning to leave for another job. On December 5th, she didn't show up for her last shift. The next week, her name was added to the obituaries in the local paper. Car accident another, January 23rd, Morales. That was one of our techs. On January 23rd, he was found slumped over in the break room, massive heart attack. Each time the handwriting matched, the date matched, the outcome matched. I tried to convince myself it was coincidence. After all, it's easy to twist meaning onto patterns when you're looking for them. But the more I checked, the worse it got. Discharges, deaths, transfers, every one of them was there in the journals, written before they happened. It wasn't just staff, patients too. Sometimes he'd scrawl just a first name, sometimes initials, sometimes a vague descriptor. The tall man, the singer, they'd be gone within weeks. One night, curiosity, or maybe stupidity, got the better of me. During rounds, I slipped into his room while he was sedated and flipped through the latest journal. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely keep the flashlight steady. Most of the entries looked the same as usual. Names, dates. But near the very back, one page stood out. The handwriting was larger, more frantic. Words jammed into the paper so hard the pen tore through. It read, "The listener." Tonight I froze. It didn't say a listener. It said "the listener." And the way it was written, it wasn't meant for staff. It wasn't meant for the other patients. It was meant for whoever was hearing the story. That means you. Yes, you, with the headphones in, letting the rain sounds blur the edges of my voice. Or maybe you're watching on your phone, propped up in bed, eyes half closed. Doesn't matter. You're listening right now, check your clock. What time is it? Because that's what I did the first time I read those words. I looked up at the wall clock above his bed. The second hand wasn't ticking. It was just still. When I blinked, it jumped forward, skipping whole minutes. And then I heard the sound of pages turning. Slowly, deliberately. But the journal was closed in my lap. His hands were tied to the bed. I don't remember leaving that room. I don't remember locking the door behind me. But later when I checked, the journal was gone. Not in his room, not in storage, not in evidence. Vanished. The writer never said a word. Not to me, not to anyone. But sometimes when I passed his room at night, he'd be sitting up in bed, staring at the ceiling with this faint smile on his face, like he knew something I didn't. Like he was waiting for me to catch up, and maybe he's waiting for you now, too. Because if his journals are still out there, and I think they are, then the next name written down won't be mine. It'll be yours. Every hospital has its filing system, cabinets full of charts, digital records tucked behind passwords, mountains of paperwork that bury every shift in ink and signatures. But in psych wards, there's always another layer. The kind of records you'll never see unless someone trusts you or hates you enough to show them. We called them the forbidden files. They weren't kept in the usual cabinets. No barcode stickers, no insurance numbers, no neat little tabs. These were kept in a battered black binder, locked away in the supervisor's office, on a shelf so high you wouldn't notice unless you knew where to look. The first time I saw it, I thought it was nothing more than an old manual. Until one night, the charge nurse left the office door cracked. I couldn't help myself. The binder wasn't full of medical records. Not exactly. It was stranger than that. Some entries looked clinical. Patient names, treatment notes, discharge plans. But the handwriting changed, almost mid-page, shifting from the neat, professional tone of a doctor to frantic scrawls, like someone writing just to warn whoever might come after. Not every case was about illness, some were containment. One file described a patient transferred in with no paperwork, no family, no history. He spoke in a language no one recognized, but everyone swore they understood him, each hearing words in their own mother tongue. The file ended mid-sentence, "Do not let him count past 7. And then nothing but ink smeared down the page. Another described an entire room as the patient. Room 4B. It said the walls had episodes where they pulsed like a heartbeat. Staff rotation records listed who went in for observation, but the names were crossed out in red ink. No outcomes noted. Just crossed out. I should have stopped reading, but my hands wouldn't obey. Some pages were fully redacted, thick black bars across entire paragraphs. But one file, one I'll never forget. had a warning in bold, underlined 3 times. Do not duplicate, do not describe, do not speak. The section beneath was mostly blacked out, except for a fragment scrawled in the margin, like someone couldn't resist slipping through a crack in the rules. It said, "Still among us, listening, that's all. No name, no diagnosis. Just that. I know I shouldn't be telling you this. The files weren't meant for me. They weren't meant for anyone outside the ward. And maybe, just maybe, they weren't meant to be read at all. But if I don't share at least one piece of it, I feel like those pages will rot in my head until they spread like mold. And I can't be the only one carrying them. So take this fragment. Pick it apart. Theories, guesses, speculation, I won't stop you. Maybe you'll piece it together better than I can. Maybe that's what the files wanted all along. But understand this. Everything I've told you so far, the screamer, the tall man, the lullabies, the drawings, the locked wing, even the journals. Those are only the cases that made it into conversation. That binder was something else. A record of what the ward couldn't admit out loud. And the deeper I went, the more one phrase kept repeating in my head. Some stories aren't lost. They're buried, which brings me to the one I swore I'd never tell. Not because I don't want to. Because I don't know if speaking it makes it real. This is the one I promised myself I'd never tell. The one that still feels wrong, even shaping the words in my throat. Officially, it doesn't exist. No chart, no record, no intake paperwork. But I remember the patient. I remember because he remembered me. He came in on a rainy Tuesday or maybe a Friday. I can't pin it down. Time slips when I think about him. He didn't fight, didn't scream, didn't plead. He just walked into the ward like he'd been expected, like he knew the way, his name. I want to say it started with an M, or maybe it was my own name. Because when I asked, he smiled in this tired, cracked way and said, "You already know." At first, the others dismissed him. Another delusional. Another case of broken mind turned into narrative. But the things he said weren't random. They had weight, specificity. He told one nurse about the scar under her sleeve, one she'd never spoken of. He whispered to an orderly that the pills he'd hidden in his sock drawer were already molding. And then he looked at me. "You're already unstable," he said. "You just haven't noticed the seams." I laughed it off. But I didn't sleep that night, because something about the ward began to feel wrong. Time loss, they call it, when you work nights. Hours bleeding together. But this was sharper. I'd glance at the clock, 2:47 a.m., and in the next breath, it was 5:12. My notes showed whole conversations written in my handwriting I didn't remember having. The patient would smile when I found them. "I told you," he'd say. Other staff began to double. Not metaphorically. I'd see 2 orderlies doing rounds at the same time, same face, same uniform, same voice, and no one else seemed to notice. Once I looked at the security monitor and saw myself walking down a hallway I wasn't in. The feed cut. When it came back, only one of me remained. I never checked again. His face blurred after a while. Not just in memory. In reality, looking at him was like trying to recall a dream while it's still happening. Sometimes he was tall, sometimes short. Sometimes old, sometimes young. "Which version of me are you talking to now?" he'd ask. And I could never answer. I tried documenting him, writing down details like weight, height, eye color. Every time I looked back, the words had changed. Brown eyes became green, thin became heavy, and at the bottom of each page, written in my own shaky script, "Stop the worst part?" He wasn't always in his bed. Staff would do checks, clipboards in hand, nodding at the empty mattress as though nothing was wrong. Patients whispered about him in the past tense like he'd already gone, but I'd still find him in the common room sometimes, alone, staring at the rain through the reinforced glass. "Do you hear it?" he asked me once. "The rain?" I said. He shook his head. "The repetition, that's when I noticed it. The drip of a leak in the corner, the buzz of the fluorescent light, the rhythm of my own pen tapping the desk, all looping like we were caught in a scratched record. They're listening through the cracks," he told me, "and soon they'll notice you too. I shouldn't tell you this, but I think he was right, because as I'm saying this, I keep losing track. I scroll back and half my sentences aren't the ones I wrote. Sometimes there's an extra word in my own voice, one I didn't speak, and sometimes I swear it isn't me writing at all. The last entry in his file, that phantom file that doesn't exist, was just one word. In red ink, redacted. I don't know if it was his name, or the diagnosis, or the warning. But when I read it, I heard someone behind me whisper, "That's you," and I turned. There was no one there. At least, I think there wasn't. Sometimes I wonder if I'm still in that ward. If I ever left. If these stories I've been telling are mine to share, or just the echoes of a patient pacing in circles, convinced they're free. Maybe I'm not the narrator. Maybe I'm the file, and if that's true, then you're not listening to me. You're reading what's been written about you. Check the clock. Has time slipped? Do you remember the last 10 minutes or only fragments? Don't answer out loud, they're listening. And if you see someone who looks exactly like you in the corner of your eye, don't turn your head. If this video disappears, you'll know why. Not every story is meant to leave the walls of that ward. Some vanish because of negligence, lost files, burned archives. But some vanish because they were never supposed to exist in the first place. I shouldn't have told you any of this. I know that. I can feel the weight of eyes on me even as I speak. Like I've opened a door I'll never be able to close. But if I don't share it, the stories rot in silence, and silence is the one thing they thrive in. Maybe you think this was just entertainment, background noise to fall asleep to, a voice wrapped in rain sounds to soften the edges of your insomnia. But I wasn't trying to soothe you. I was warning you, because the ward doesn't end with its brick walls and locked doors. It leaks, it seeps, and the things that lived inside it don't like to be forgotten. When you close your eyes tonight, you'll hear the rain, that steady patter, so familiar, so safe. But listen closer. Behind it, beneath it, voices, whispers, the ones who screamed at 3:17, the ones who vanished from their beds, the ones who sang lullabies through the vents until their throats were dry. You might think I'm exaggerating. That's fine. That's safer. Pretend this is just a story. But when you hear your name, when you hear it whispered like a secret the storm itself is trying to keep, you'll remember me. I can't keep talking for long. Already the words don't feel like mine. They come heavy, sluggish, like something is editing them before they reach you. Maybe when you hit replay, the sentences will be different. Maybe I'll be gone entirely. If that happens, promise me something. Don't go looking. Don't search the records. Don't check old maps of condemned wings or chase rumors in comment sections. Curiosity is the key they've been waiting for. And once you turn it, the lock doesn't shut again. Some of you won't listen. Some of you are already scrolling back, replaying sections, checking the timestamps where the static bled through. You'll convince yourself you heard something in the background. Maybe you did. Maybe that's how it starts. But most of you will drift off tonight the way you always do. Rain against the glass, my voice in your ears, the hum of the world dimming into sleep. Just remember what I said before you surrender to it. If you hear a lullaby in the rain tonight, don't follow it.